Jeffrey Dahmer, also known as the Cannibal of Milwaukee, was an American serial killer who between 1978 and 1991 killed 17 boys, teenagers or adults, mostly homosexuals and of African American or Asian ethnicity, and with a criminal record of some entity behind them. In addition to the huge number of victims, his particularly cruel methods caused a sensation, from sexual violence to quartering, up to the preservation of some parts of the body of his victims, for example, the skull. Today, the chilling story of Jeffrey Dahmer returns to the center of the new TV series released on Netflix on 21 September 2022. 10 episodes that trace the life of the Milwaukee Monster. In a few days, the TV series reached the top of the most viewed TV series ever, beating all kinds of existing records with an impressive debut of 196 million viewing hours in the first 3 days. In this first part of the new series, In the Mind of the Serial Killer, we will broadly tell the story of Jeffrey Dahmer. In the second part, however, which you will find as soon as available by clicking here above, we will analyze his psychological profile thanks to the results of some psychiatric reports. Was he mentally ill or completely sane? Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in West Allis, a city of 60,000 inhabitants in the United States of America, in Milwaukee County, in the state of Wisconsin. His father, Lionel Herbert Dahmer, is a student enrolled in the Faculty of Chemistry, while his mother, Joyce Annette, is an instructor of teleprinters, an electromechanical device used in the past to transmit messages over the telegraph network. Although there are conflicting news on family life in the Dahmer household, Jeffrey's childhood is marked by his mother's struggle against depression that forces her to bed and continuous treatment. On the other hand, there is also an absence of the father forced by his university studies to stay away from home most of the time. Neither parent devotes so much time to their son, who later recalled feeling uncertain about the solidity of the family and remembering the extreme tension and numerous quarrels between his parents during his early years. Jeffrey looks like an energetic and happy child until he undergoes double inguinal hernia surgery just before his 4th birthday. According to his father, since that day, something in Jeffrey changes forever. During the first years of elementary school, Jeffrey is a shy and quiet child. He has few friends, and a teacher begins to notice his first signs of abandonment due to his mother's illness and the absence of his father. Signs that start to get worse when her mother becomes pregnant with her second child, David. At the age of 6, in October 1966, Jeffrey and his family moved to Ohio, and his father started working as a research chemist after graduating from college, a job that continues to keep him away from home for a long time. From an early age, Jeffrey had shown an interest in dead animals, a passion perhaps born at the age of 4 when he saw his father removing the bones of the animals under the house. Dahmer is strangely struck by the sound produced by the bones and enjoys looking for other bones around the house and begins to explore the bodies of live animals to find out how they are made. After 2 years, when Jeffrey is 8 years old, they move back to Bath Township. The new house is located in 1.5 hectares of woods, and a few steps from his home, Jeffrey discovers the existence of a small hut. He thus begins to collect large insects such as dragonflies and moths, and the skeletons of small animals such as squirrels to store them in vases full of formaldehyde. Jeffrey starts asking weird questions like what would happen if chicken bones were dipped in bleach. His father, satisfied with his scientific curiosity, shows him how to whiten and store bones safely. Jeffrey thus begins to collect the dead animals he found along the roads to dissect them and then bury them in the woods behind his home. At 14 years old begins his first year at Revere High School, a public high school. Jeffrey appears to be a polite, intelligent boy with average school grades. He begins to regularly consume large quantities of alcohol, so much so that he hides the scotch bottles inside the jacket he wears to school and begins to define alcohol as his medicine. His classmates see him as an outcast, a boy who speaks little, except when he acts like a clown in class, simulating epileptic seizures and cerebral palsy. Jokes that he often made to receive money to then spend on buying alcohol. On reaching puberty, he discovers he is gay, but does not tell his parents. He begins to develop his first sexual fantasies, where he dreams of dominating and controlling a completely submissive male partner. Here his first murderous instinct was born, at the age of 16. He wanted to unconscious a particular male jogger that he would find attractive, and then make sexual use of his body. One day he hides in the bushes with a baseball bat to wait for the man. But that day, no one passed. His grades at school get worse, so much so that he is followed by a private tutor, and in the same year his parents divorce. Her mother and her brother move to Wisconsin to live with relatives, while her father temporarily settles in a nearby motel. At the age of 18, Dahmer returns to his old family home in Ohio. Her mother receives custody of her children, but when Jeffrey Dahmer graduates in May 1978, he decides to stay in the family home. It is here that on June 18, 1978, Jeffrey, at the age of 18, commits his first murder, killing a 19-year-old hitchhiker named Steve Hicks. From here, Jeffrey falls into a spiral of violence, which will lead him to kill a total of 17 people. After his first crime, Jeffrey enrolled at Ohio State University, but he abandons his studies after only 3 months due to low class attendance. At the age of 19, at the request of his father, he enlisted in the United States Army to become an anesthetist, but after 2 years he was deemed unsuitable for military service due to his increasingly severe alcoholism. He briefly worked in a blood bank at a hospital in Miami Beach, and in 1981, at the age of 21, his father sent him to live in West Allis along with his grandmother, the only member of the family he showed affection. At first, things seem to be going well. He accompanies his grandmother to church, does housework, and is hired as a phlebotomist for 10 months before being fired. Jeffrey is unemployed for 2 years and uses the money his grandmother gives him to buy cigarettes and alcohol. Dahmer slips deeper and deeper into addiction to alcohol, so much so that he is arrested for drunkenness and obscene acts in a public place. Dahmer begins to frequent gay bars and bathing establishments with greater insistence, up to having sex with mannequins stolen from shops. He tried to dig up the corpse of an 18-year-old boy from the cemetery to take the body home, but the too hard ground ruins his plan. 9 years after his first crime, on September 15, 1987, Dahmer commits his second crime. The third on January 16, 1988. The fourth on March 24, 1988. In September 1988, he was turned away from his grandmother's house due to the constant disturbing noises and terrible smells coming from the cellar. He moves into an apartment in Milwaukee, near the chocolate factory where he works. In the same month, he lures a 13-year-old boy by promising him money for a photo shoot. However, the victim manages to escape and report him, having Jeffrey arrested on charges of sexual assault. While the waiting process, which later sentenced him to 10 months, Dahmer returns to live in his grandmother's house, where on March 25, 1989, he commits his fifth murder. On May 14, 1990, shortly after obtaining parole, Dahmer moved from his grandmother's home to an apartment north of Milwaukee. In just over a year, in a period from June 1990 to July 1991, Jeffrey kills 12 other people. Here, even neighbors complain about the nauseating smells coming from his apartment and the occasional noise of a chainsaw. Smells that Dahmer justifies with breaking the freezer or with the death of his tropical fish in the aquarium. On July 22, 1991, something did not go as planned. What was supposed to be Jeffrey's next victim, Tracy Edwards, manages to escape from his apartment after punching him. He goes down the street and stops a police patrol, convincing the agents to check Dahmer's apartment. What they find inside is a macabre and gruesome scene, a real slaughterhouse. Body parts of all kinds are found scattered throughout the apartment. Skulls in Dahmer's bedroom and inside a closet, human hearts, trays filled with blood in the bottom of the refrigerator, and human organs in the freezer. Investigators also found whole skeletons and a huge 57-gallon container inside which are 3 torsos and some parts of the body dipped in an acid solution. In his bedroom, in a drawer of the nightstand, his Polaroid camera is found with 74 images that describe in detail the dismemberment of Dahmer's victims. His apartment was later demolished in November 1992. The trial begins on January 30, 1992 in Milwaukee, in which he must answer for 15 counts of indictment. He pleads guilty to all the murders committed and is sentenced to life imprisonment for each victim, thus totaling 957 years in prison. He is imprisoned at the Columbia Correctional Institute in Portage. On November 28, he was killed by a schizophrenic inmate, a certain Christopher Scarver, with a dumbbell rod stolen from the prison gym. Jeffrey Dahmer will die while being transported to the hospital from the reported head injury. During the trial, the lawyers wondered if Jeffrey Dahmer was sane or mentally ill. Thanks to some psychiatric evaluations conducted during the various stages of the process, it was possible to trace a psychological profile of Jeffrey Dahmer. What was the result? We will see it better in the second part of the video, which you will find as soon as available by clicking here at the top. What was Jeffrey Dahmer's modus operandi? Dahmer would lure victims near gay meeting places, pretending to be a photographer looking for models, or under the pretext of seeing hardcore movies or to have a drink together. They were subsequently killed by strangulation, and some underwent acts of necrophilia, while others were lobotomized. Jeffrey would drill holes in the victims' skulls to inject muriatic acid or boiling water into the frontal lobe in an attempt to make them submissive and non-resistant. In his deviant and perverse mentality, he was convinced that he was annihilating the personality of his victims and at the same time leaving their bodies alive, thing that never happened as they died shortly after. Finally, Dahmer removed body parts and kept them in the freezer as if they were food or in containers with acid or formaldehyde. He buried the bones in the garden or dissolved them in chemicals. Often the severed head was cooked in a pot to remove the flesh and then keep the skull, which was painted to make it look like plastic and kept as an ornament. Jeffrey Dahmer's modus operandi was then documented by the photographs he took. I kept pieces of their bodies because it was my way of remembering their appearance, their physical beauty. If I couldn't keep them there with me, at least I could keep their skeletons.